Alice in Wonderland. Alice was a curious little girl with bright blue eyes and golden hair that tumbled down her shoulders in loose curls. She loved to dream, and she loved to ask questions, and more than anything she loved to wander and imagine what might be beyond the ordinary things she saw every day. One sunny afternoon she was sitting by a riverbank with her sister, trying to read a book. The book had no pictures and no conversations, and Alice thought it was terribly dull. Her eyes began to wander away from the page, following the lazy drift of the clouds above and the shimmering dance of the water below. Just when she was about to close the book and sigh with boredom, something very peculiar caught her eye. A white rabbit, wearing a neat little waistcoat, hopped by. But what was most extraordinary was that the rabbit pulled out a pocket watch, tapped it nervously, and muttered, oh dear, I shall be late." Alice blinked. A rabbit with a waistcoat and a watch? That was not something you saw every day. Without a moment's thought, she jumped up and followed him across the field. The rabbit hopped faster and faster until he suddenly disappeared into a large rabbit hole under a hedge. Alice did not hesitate. She bent down, peeked inside, and before she knew it, she tumbled head first into the hole. Down, down, down she fell, through what felt like the longest tunnel in the world. Strange cupboards, maps, and clocks floated past her as though they were falling too. She wondered if she would ever stop falling. Just when she began to feel sleepy, she landed gently on a soft pile of leaves. Alice stood up and brushed herself off. She found herself in a long hallway with dozens of doors. Some were tall, some short, some painted in bright colors, and some very plain. She tried the handles, but each one was locked. At last, she noticed a tiny door no taller than her knee. When she bent down, she saw that it had a beautiful golden key lying on a glass table nearby. She grabbed the key and fit it into the lock, and to her delight, the little door opened. Behind it was a magical garden full of sparkling fountains, bright flowers, and paths that twisted like ribbons. But there was a problem. The door was far too small for her to fit through. Alice sighed. She wanted more than anything to explore that garden. Just then she noticed a small bottle on the table. A label hung from its neck that read, "Drink me." Alice hesitated. Should she? Then curiosity took over. She took a sip, and suddenly she began to shrink smaller and smaller until she was no bigger than a doll. She laughed in amazement. Now she was just the right size to fit through the tiny door. She slipped inside and stepped into the most enchanting place she had ever seen. The garden stretched wide, with singing flowers that swayed in the breeze and butterflies made of shining glass wings. Alice wandered along a path and soon came across a group of very odd characters sitting around a long table under a tree. A large teapot stood in the center, and teacups of all shapes and sizes covered the table. A hare with twitchy whiskers, a sleepy dormouse, and a man in a tall hat were seated there. "Hello," said Alice politely. "No room," cried the hare, though plenty of seats were empty. Alice sat down anyway. The man with the tall hat, who introduced himself as the Mad Hatter, poured tea into her cup while talking nonsense about time and riddles. The dormouse kept dozing off mid-sentence, and the March hare twitched and dipped biscuits into his teacup without looking. Alice giggled. It was the strangest tea party she had ever attended. They asked her riddles with no answers, sang silly songs, and kept switching places at the table. It was very confusing, but also rather fun. After a while, Alice decided to continue her adventure. She waved goodbye and walked along the winding garden paths. Soon she stumbled upon a large playing field where a most unusual game was being played. Flamingos were used as mallets, hedgehogs curled into balls served as the croquet balls, and soldiers shaped like playing cards bent their backs to form hoops. Alice gasped in surprise. Standing in the center of the field was a tall, fierce-looking woman in a bright red dress. She had a crown on her head and a very loud voice. "Off with their heads!" she shouted at nearly everyone. Alice realized this must be the Queen of Hearts. The Queen spotted Alice and called out, "You, come play!" Alice picked up a flamingo mallet, though the bird kept flapping its wings and twisting its neck so she could barely aim. The hedgehogs kept rolling away before she could hit them. The Queen grew redder and redder with frustration. "Off with her head!" she cried. Alice trembled, but before anything could happen, a kindly man with a crown walked over. He was the King of Hearts. Now, dear," he said gently. "She's only a child." The Queen grumbled but waved her hand impatiently. Alice quickly excused herself and slipped away from the field before the Queen could change her mind. She wandered deeper into the garden and came across a tree where a strange grin floated in the air. A moment later, the grin grew whiskers and stripes until it revealed the Cheshire Cat. He perched on a branch, smiling from ear to ear. "Who are you?" asked Alice. "That depends," purred the cat, "on where you'd like to go." "I'm not quite sure," said Alice. "Then it doesn't matter which way you go," replied the cat. His grin grew even wider, and then he vanished into thin air, leaving only the smile behind for a moment before that too disappeared. Alice shook her head, half amused, half confused, and continued her walk. Soon she came across a little door set into a tree. She turned the handle and stepped inside, and to her surprise she was back in the long hallway with the table and tiny key. She was still very small, and she realized she had left the key on the table, far above her reach. Just then she spotted another little cake on a dish with a note that said, "Eat me." Without hesitation, Alice nibbled the cake, and this time she began to grow taller and taller until she was bigger than the hallway itself. Her head pressed against the ceiling. "Oh dear," she cried. "Now I'm far too big." Luckily, after a little while, she shrank back down to her proper size again. She was very relieved. Alice rubbed her eyes. All these strange things, the talking animals, the tea party, the Queen shouting, the cat disappearing, it all felt like a dream. She began to feel very tired. She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, she found herself back on the grassy riverbank where she had first seen the white rabbit. Her sister was still sitting beside her, calmly reading her book as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Alice stretched and smiled. "What a curious dream I've had," she whispered. She looked up at the clouds drifting across the sky and wondered if perhaps somewhere the Mad Hatter was still pouring tea, or the Cheshire Cat was still grinning from a branch. Her sister looked at her and said, "What are you smiling about?" "Oh, nothing," said Alice softly. "Just a wonderful, curious adventure." And with that, she lay back on the grass, closed her eyes again, and drifted into the sweetest sleep, her dreams filled with white rabbits, golden gardens, and a world where anything was possible if only you believed.